right, all right. Whichever you want. Yeah. I am so excited. If you can please take your seats. It's on. Yeah, it's on. I just need to project more. That's the feedback across 2 days. I am really excited for this next and next to last session of the day. We have a conversation between a VC and an entrepreneur. Whitnie Narcisse and Tara Viswanathan are two incredible operators and entrepreneurs. Specifically, Tara, I have admired from a distance for a long time as somebody who balances one of the principles of responsive really beautifully, and that's profit versus purpose. So as you read the Responsive Org Manifesto, you know that we talk a lot about these tensions that every organization needs to balance. And it's up to us as we build our organizations where we choose to fall across them. This is going to be a conversation about things like experimentation in your organization and how do we balance these tensions, that there is no one size fits all, but there's a lot of stories and a lot of tactics here that I think we can all use. So please join me in welcoming these two incredible folks on stage.
Hi, everyone. How are you? Woo! Almost at the end. Yeah, I work at First Round. It's a seed stage venture firm, and we've invested in over 500 companies. I've been there a decade, and Tara's one of my favorite founders. So you're all in a tree. I'm in for a treat. I'm not just saying that. I'm not just saying that. Truly one of my favorites, and will become yours in the next 30 minutes. I'm going to ask a few questions, but would rather have audience participation. So if you have questions, please raise your hands. So the first question, we're talking about scaling culture. And what we always notice is that a company is a reflection of their founder. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how that's been reflected in the culture of Rupa.
Oh man, Whitnie told me she was going to ask this question, and I still don't have an answer for it. It's hard to separate. So I, at least from a culture perspective, I have always said that it's impossible for the culture of a company to be anything other than the personality of the founder, or the dominating founder. And it is very true, but I think it's also the work that we do is absolutely a reflection as well. So I think when you ask the question of these things being intertwined, there's the concept of our business and like what we do in the industry that we are in, which 100% is a reflection of me, just based on the fact that I have been crazy enough to want to spend my life doing this work. We can get into that, but I know today's a talk about culture. So I really do think that in the amount you have to show up to your team as a founder and as CEO, you have to be authentic. Like, people can smell if you're not real. And so for Rupa, what that means is, I think we're a little bit intense. We're a little bit intense, but we really care about each other. And there's never been an all hands where we haven't had hilarious jokes in the Zoom chat. And I think that's one of the first things people notice, is that we're a primarily remote company. And if you join on your first day and you join our Monday morning all hands, you'll just see the Zoom chat go crazy. And I think in a lot of other companies, I've heard people say, oh, hey, let's make sure people are actually getting the message. Let's make sure that people are focused on what the content is. Are people getting the takeaways of the goals and how we're doing? And at least for me, that's actually less relevant than feeling like you're coming into an energized company that cares about each other and wants to be there and is talking to one another. And so that's just one small example, but I think that at its core, it's impossible for any company, and Rupa included, to be anything other than, who the founder is.
You are energetic, and the Zoom chat's energetic. All of us want our Zoom chats to be blowing up. How did that start?
It started with me and my co-founder, because people follow your lead. And so we would just post, we would just do commentary, right? We were basically like just the commentators when people were presenting, when each other were presenting, we'd do that. We'd also just we try to make things different. I think it's hard to talk about it. It's almost something that you have to experience. But there have been so many funny moments. We have a lab testing company is sent, the really bad one-liner for what we do. But we added, a new blood lab partner, and my co-founder showed up dressed in like a Dracula outfit to all hands. And this is just like, she just felt like doing this, and she didn't even tell me, and she just showed up. And the people whose first day it was just like, what is happening? Where am I? But that's just how it is.
Okay, Dracula is not the only costume I've heard of. Tell the folks more about dressing up at Rupa.
I don't even know how this started, or even I think it's when it goes back to culture. I think that what I hear from a lot of people is what is your culture? And I think the thing that people are looking for are what are the norms that you've put into place to create some sort of emotion from people, whether that is intensity or engagement or whatever it is, connection with one another. And I think the biggest thing that I have to say about that is that the thing that you can't do is try to put process around it. Because as soon as you start doing the same thing every week, it's a chemical reaction, right? People don't, it normalizes, and it doesn't make as much of an impression on people. So you actually have to, and this is the hard part, you have to keep things fresh, and you have to actually put effort into it. And so what happened was, we one quarter, as your company progresses, you go from doing, weekly goals and weekly sprints to hitting product market fit, to suddenly being able to track actual metrics, to maybe having monthly goals. Your cadence for this stuff gets longer. And so at some point, a couple of years in, we started doing quarterly cadence. I think it's also really important to really capture time for people, because otherwise every day kind of rolls into one another. So we try to say, hey, we're going to look back every month or every quarter. So at this point in time, about 2 years in, we had decided that we were going to do end of quarter, what we call, we have a weekly meeting called Exhale, which is just our, we do fun stuff in there. We bring speakers, whatever, but it's end of quarter Exhale. And so what I did was I collected all of our stats, all of our wins, all of our goals, and made this giant surprise presentation for our team. All we had was we had an hour and a half blocked, and no one knew what it was going to be. And the first time I did this, everyone went wild, and we didn't even, it was little things. Like we had a record quarter, and it was incredible. And then, we announced this little like swag thing, and then people just got really excited about it. And it was less about, it was a celebration of everybody's hard work, but it was more in just like the presentation and the excitement and calling everybody out by name, and people loved it. And then the next quarter after that, it was still really exciting. But then the next quarter after that, people started getting used to it, right? What was this surprise and this kind of dopamine reward, right? Suddenly became an expectation. And as soon as something becomes an expectation, it loses its value a little bit, especially with culture. And I think this really ties, you could talk about culture, you could talk about customer experience. There's a lot of things that this relates to. But by the third time or so, people were ready for this. Like, okay, cool, end of quarter Exhale. It's going to be this hype meeting. Awesome, great, all of that. So then the night before, I called my co-founder and I said, I think we need to do something a little bit different. I think we need to surprise the team. Or maybe, I think it was 3 nights before or something. And I said, what I think we should do is we should announce a quarterly theme. And so at that point, we had just got a new competitor on the scene. And so I said, what if we do, our company's in Garupa. So I said, what if we do Pirates of the Caribbean? And we basically, like, my co-founder is also very visual, the whole thing. The next morning, she wakes up, she's like, I had a fever dream. And she's like, I sketched out this pirates map where it has all of our goals in here, and we gave it to someone on Fiverr, and they made this whole goal, this pirate chart. And then we both got pirate outfits, and so no one was expecting this. And so we go through all of our goals. It's a normal end of quarter State of the Union, end of quarter Exhale. And then at the end, we say, one more thing. And so we're going to do a quick intermission. And then we both come back, and it's like Pirates of the Caribbean theme. And we're both in pirate gear. And we've basically like written out this narrative about our next goal that we want to hit over the quarter. And the team just lost their minds. Like I have the Zoom chats from that, but I still have people saying, I remember my first, and then basically every Monday for the rest of that quarter, I showed up dressed in pirate gear. And so anyway, it's like, it's all about this like surprise and delight experience, even internally. I think so often we think about that for our customers and our product, but we so rarely think about that internally.
On the flip side, I think surprise and delight is fantastic. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on rituals generally. Like sometimes that's what makes the company. Like I heard people talking about Amazon, like the annual letters, how do you think about rituals?
Yeah. You need order and chaos. And I think that that's the thing that is super important, because when people feel ungrounded, you can't just throw, a pirate costume in there. Like that's not going to make anything better. And so it's like, and I think there's another concept here of like peacetime and wartime, right? When everything's good, when the metrics are good, you can do this silly stuff, and like that can be culture. But when you're in wartime, we don't do any of this. Wartime is about inspiration. It's about getting grounded in our wins. It's about you have to create momentum and feel wins. And so it's really important to remember the context. And this goes back to the original point about you can't put process around culture, or you can't, for this specifically, you can't just say, this is what we do week over week, year over year. It has to be reflective of the times that you're in. That said, process is super important. Rituals are super important. So we have, our people know Monday morning we're going to meet up. Friday afternoon we're going to meet up. Once every 3 weeks we're going to do this. They might not know what's going to happen in those meetings, but they know that there's something there.
So good. So you've been building this for 6 years? Yeah. 6-ish years. What % would you say has been peacetime versus wartime?
Oh man. So here's the thing about like timing also. A lot of founders like to romanticize the years that they've been in, so suddenly you see, oh, I've been doing, we launched in X day, but then they've been working on it for 3 years prior. Like 6 years was the moment of, we have no idea what we're doing, but we believe in this space and we should, quit our jobs and go build something in this space. So the first 2 years, we're actually trying to find the right wedge into the market and trying to figure out a product market fit. And that was wartime. Like in its own way, when you're all alone and when you're figuring things out, that is wartime. And then we had, up until now, we've had 18 quarters of consecutive growth.
Yes,
and
queen.
That's like, I know, which is
okay,
nuts.
give it up. 18 quarters.
But okay,
we don't see that normally. So.
Yeah, that's fair. So, but the thing about that is metrics can be deceiving. We've actually been in wartime for the last year or so. And even though we've been growing, it's a distinctly different type of growth. It's a distinctly different culture. It's a distinctly different type of person we even need leading. Like I have to show a different side of me now than I did 2 years ago. So I'd say about, 60% of the company in peacetime and 40% of the company in wartime.
What does that side of you now look like?
Probably the side that only a handful of the company had really ever seen, but I think it's important to show, which is, hey, there is no way I am going, this ship is going to sink with me at the helm. Like that, it's that feeling. It's feeling like I'm not going to spend my time on silly things right now, and I'm like, we're going to get shit done. And I think that it's getting this, like the angry dictator wartime leader. Actually, just what I've realized is it showcases fear. And I think what you need in that wartime leader is somebody who maybe senses fear or has fear, but doesn't ever actually succumb to it. And to do that, in peacetime, you can have decentralized decision making. You can have more bottom heavy power decision, like that kind of thing. In wartime, you have to make the decision. And when people don't know what the right thing to do is, like you have to make the call. It's a ton of uncertainty. And so I think the side of me that comes out is the side that wants to win at every cost.
I feel like you have, just knowing you for a long time, I feel like you have the perfect balance between like win at all costs, I'm going to get this ish done, and the other side, which is just really kind-hearted and you care deeply about your team. You put your team before yourself in so many interactions. And I'm curious, like, where does that come from? And how can you balance it so well when, in truth be told, I see lots of founders who are either, on one end of the spectrum or the other. You've done a really nice job of being both.
I don't know where it comes from. I think this always just been, I know this is like not helpful at all, but I think it's just kind of always been in me. For better or worse, like we all have our core of who we are, right? It's the 2-year-old in the crib showing personality traits, right? And the parents get like there is a very real nature to all of us, and then our life shapes us and almost like gives us all of these different outfits that we can wear. And I think when I think about my nature, it's uncomfortably empathetic to a scary, and I'd say it's actually very hard for me to sometimes like turn that off. But I think that I have learned the wanting to win has always been there. So I don't really know where that comes from. I think maybe it's the immigrant, who knows what it is, but it's this, how do you balance it? That is really, really tough. And so when I think about it, we all have our nature, but that doesn't have to dictate our future. That doesn't have to be our destiny. We all can kind of build these other skills to complement ourselves. And I think early on, I realized that there was this nature in me that was helpful in some situations, but is maybe not helpful in other situations. And so how do you build those other skills? And the times where it's actually been really tough is when, you can understand why, for people who have a ton of empathy, like you can understand why a person might have missed their goal, but that doesn't make it okay. And so what do you do in those moments where yes, there's a lot of life stuff going on, and yes, how do you handle that and how do you deal with that? And I think that is where you kind of have to make a call. And how do you be human, but also, and this is how I think about it, it's like you have to be human on the individual level, which is thinking about the person who you're directly talking to. But you also have to be human on the collective level, where at times those are at odds, right? Because you need the company to be successful to make everybody win, to bring everybody up. And at times that is at odds with the individual. So what I've learned is basically sometimes you have to understand and like pull out the empathy for the individual, and sometimes you have to understand and pull out like that empathy for, and the wanting to win for the entire group.
So good. I'm gonna take questions soon if anyone's interested. Robin had mentioned profit versus purpose, and maybe we can start with purpose, then we can talk about profit. But when you think about purpose, and you're just talking about empathy on the individual level, and then you think about the company level, how do you think about what your purpose is as founder, CEO?
I was going to start this by saying I'm a Texan living in San Francisco. And when you think about like profit and purpose, like, I actually really believe in, creating value and having that value be demonstrated by making money. Like I actually very much believe in this currency that we've created to capture value. That said, like you have to have a conscience about it. And so, but I never even think about that. Like I wasn't raised with the idea that money is bad, or that, because I think if you have a certain baseline to, these are the rules of what it means to be a good person or be a good part of society, you don't even have to worry about that to some extent, because there's this whole layer of stuff that you're not even going to get into. When you think about it that way, then you think about profit as this tool to have greater and greater impact in the world. And fundamentally, like we can't have a successful business, we can't impact millions of lives if we don't sustain ourselves. And so I think purpose goes so much deeper, by the way. Like when I think about purpose in the context of profit and purpose, I think it's a false dichotomy. And I think that for most of us, really going after both is what we should be doing. And if you have trouble with that, there's like some underlying stuff we need to fix first. So that's my thought on profit and purpose. But just with purpose in and of itself, it's not just being a founder. It's anybody who's a part of an early stage company, or anybody who's spending their life in any kind of commercial endeavor, whether you're dedicating your hours, whether you're dedicating your money, whatever it is. Why are we doing it if it's not meaningful to us? Like, what's the point? And I think that, if we're sitting in this room, we're probably fortunate enough to have a choice in what we want to do. And if we're fortunate enough to have a choice in what we want to do, we should align that with something that makes us feel alive every day, because that's the only way that we can maximize our contribution to the world. To me, like that's the whole point of being human, right? It's how do we contribute to this thing greater than ourselves and then leave it a better place?
So good. Thank you.
That was like a Miss America.
The world a better place. I plus one on the false dichotomy of profit and purpose, though. A lot of times when people are like, oh, you're in VC, they think I'm just like green money sign eyes all the time. And what I think a lot of people forget is that all of our LPs, all of our investors, our limited partners, the people we're making money for, are universities and nonprofits, endowments, those kinds of things. Like, we're not just making money just to fill our own bank accounts. So plus one to that. Yes. Hello.
I would love to hear your answer of how do you scale in tribal culture. So you've seen Tara. I'd love to see what's your perspective across all your people.
Thank you. How many people have heard about the founder mode article that came up? Oh, and I'm curious, how many people, the options are you like it or you hate it. How many people liked it? How many people hated it? I thought there would be more. Anyway, if you haven't read that by Paul Graham, you should check it out after this. I think that there is validity to the founder mode argument, where essentially, like a founder, because the company is such a reflection of yourself, like you have to stay involved and you have to basically, run the company the way that you believe is the best way. And at the same time, I've seen just founders not know how to run HR, how to run finance, and all of the other things. And so I do think there's validity in bringing in really strong deputies who have and can carry out the vision for you and can essentially scale the founder's vision. We see so many of our companies who run into issues on how do I translate what I want to get done to my executive team. And that's where there's a lot of fallout. And so you can see from 0 to 50, everything goes well. 50 to 100, probably bringing in their first, HR leader. But if you can't keep scaling and can't keep reaffirming the messages that you have as a founder, we've seen it fail many times. I don't know if that answers your question, but there obviously are more failure cases than success cases, but that's venture. We assume that 1 out of every 20 of our companies or so will become unicorns and beyond. Great question. Yeah.
The title of this talk is how to scale incredible company culture. Tara, you talked about a couple of firstly very expensive rituals that you have at Rupa. So you meet twice a week, you said, with the whole company, and then every couple of weeks and quarterly. How do you think about scaling those rituals? Would they still exist if Rupa was 50 or 100 times the size that you are now?
No, absolutely not. The things that we did, the rituals we did when we were 10 people is very different than 50 people, is very different than 100 people, is very different than 150. Like, it changes dramatically. One quick example of that is, this sounds silly, but it's really effective. Sometimes on Fridays, we'll just put people into, breakout rooms for 15 minutes and give them questions that they can just like ask each other about their weekend. And it sounds so forced, but it actually creates connection between people. I don't think this would work if we were, one, it doesn't make sense if we're 10 people to do this. And also, I don't think it would work if we were 500 people. And so I think it's super important to recognize recognize the size of the organization. And the most important thing about size is the nodes. It's who does everybody know each other? If so, that lends itself to different types of experiences, because imagine it's like a company of 500,000 people or more. Who feels comfortable in the Zoom chat? And so how do you create experiences that create basically just like carve out groups of people and give them spaces to connect with one another?
How would you describe how you view the relationship between culture and like value systems and at this scale?
I think values fall out of culture. I think it's hard to go the other way and say, these are our values because this is what we want our culture to be. So the way we did it was we just as leadership team, when we wanted to revamp our values, we identified people who we all loved working with. And then we just tried to identify the characteristics of them. And then we identified people who we don't love working with and identify the characteristics of them. And it was shockingly similar across the board. And then we just organized it into values that way. And so it wasn't this forced thing. I think values are a shared language to talk about the norms and what you accept and what you don't accept. And if you can't run an if you interview someone and you reject them and you can't trace it back to your values, like something's wrong with your values. Generally speaking, you can always trace it back to our values at least.
What's the most unexpected challenge you've had to face?
All of them. But like,
If you only knew, sir.
all unexpected challenge. I don't know what an expected challenge is. So like, I think that something I shouldn't say on stage, but find me after. I think truly the hardest thing is when you try your hardest to really take care of your team and somehow like they feel like you failed them anyway. And you bring managers in and you suddenly lose touch with some of the people who you work close to, and then they don't tell you that things are going wrong. And then like that kind of thing is just really, really hard. And so I think it's how do you develop really great managers? And what is the definition of a manager at your company? Because managers will, people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. And we've seen that again and again and again. But there's different types of managers, right? There's the people who are the air traffic controllers who are just kind of like, that is good for one type of company. There are the people who are IC managers who are very involved. Then there are the people who are just like purely people managers. Like there are different types. And I think one thing is we just didn't define what it meant to be a manager and what the norms and expectations are. And just the blast radius of that is huge.
Yeah. So I'm curious in terms of, I guess, early days when you're building this company culture, like you talked a little bit about the value system, but what were some of the like tactics you used to kind of get everybody on the same page from a cultural perspective? Like, you can give a couple of examples of.
Yeah. So for the first couple of years, every Sunday I wrote a State of the Union to the team. Just here's what's on my mind. And it would list everything out. And I think that signaled transparency, focus on goals. Like where my brain is will say a lot without me having to explicitly say it, right? It'll show a lot. I think especially the early days, it's a lot more show than tell. So is that, and then everybody would read it. People would comment on it. I think that's really important, is to give, create an experience where people can actually engage. And then we'd have a Monday morning meeting called State of the Union where we'd actually go through this, and I'd screen share and we'd walk through it line by line and talk about the things that were going on. Every Thursday evening, we'd have like something silly, right? We'd have like online poker, right? Where people could just it was 8 of us, and we'd just get in a room and we'd hang out. We did offsites. So I'm a big, big believer in super intentional offsites in fun places that don't feel corporate. Like we never do hotels. It's always either like Airbnbs or whatever, where people feel a sense of community. lots of other little things, but happy to chat more.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Last question. Make it good.
One of my favorite quotes is, "You can only take someone as far as you've gone yourself." So I'm curious how you scale yourself, especially with regards to emotional intelligence, so that it ripples across your company as your company scales.
Yeah, I'm such a different person than I was a year ago, 6 months ago. I mean, it's, to me, that is the most exciting part about being at a startup, is it's this personal growth journey that there is no steeper learning curve. And that's, for all of the stress and the pain and all that, like, that is the reason why, I'm super inspired by this work. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people actually like joining companies like ours. But personally, me, I mean, so many things. Part of it is just like staying in a positive mental space. Like, it is not helpful for the company if I show up stressed to Monday morning all hands. Like, that is not, I don't believe in this, like, show up authentically. So if I'm stressed, then everybody else suddenly gets stressed. Like, that piece, no. I think the whole part about showing up authentically is I actually have to get myself in a good place so that I can show up authentically. So for me, that means after we hit product market fit, I don't do anything else. So I basically work all the time, whether it's working on the company or working on myself. And that is the same bucket. So tactically, what that means is Saturdays are my one day where I don't do email, I don't do Slack. I go to a coffee shop every morning. I read a book. I journal pretty much every morning. Once a quarter, I do what I call think trip, is my think trip. So I like lock myself in a cabin in an Airbnb from Thursday to Sunday with groceries. And I basically just like eat, read, work out, and read. I basically like do 4 or 5 books in that span of time. And I just like come out a leveled up person. And it's one of the best things I do. I have so many more of these, which I'm happy to share, but this is like my personal happy place of figuring out how I can always grow faster than anybody else around me.
And I'll just quickly add, just because I've spent time with you. Every time I see Tara, she has her notebook. I can't believe you don't have your notebook right now. I have my notebook. But she's always writing and learning and getting inspired by every conversation or dinner that we're at. And I think just the best CEOs and founders are always constantly learning and constantly saying, like, this is not the truth. This is not the only way that this can be. What new information do I need as an input?
And maybe the last thing we'll end on is I really believe in the quote, if I'm not embarrassed about who I was 3 months ago, then I haven't grown enough.
Ooh, I love it. Thank you all so much.